Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
and me, Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
This recording takes place at Gertrude's writing room on the grounds of the historic Willistead Manor in Windsor. Many thanks to author and workshop facilitator Vanessa Shields for welcoming us to this space. In this program, we're going to talk a little bit about, do we still read books for young people? What is the one that we go back to over and over and over? I have answers for this. I have bought and given away copies of Archie and Mehitable probably 10 times in my life. It's a book of poetry meant for young people, but it's very grown up. It's Archie the cockroach that jumps on the keys of the typewriter and Mehitable the cat. Oh, what the hell, what the hell. I love that book. I have read it, I don't know how many times. And I also do regularly read other books for young people. Friends that write books for young people, I read them and then I pass them along to my younger cousins or recommend them, and I enjoy them. You know, I mean, a lot of great stories are written for people who are like 12 or 14. So it's terrific stuff.
When I was recently stressed out in the middle of writing my own book, I returned to the Chronicles of Narnia, and I found that very healing. But I would also say that Rosemary Sadler's Kids' Book of Black Canadian History is something that I read a lot and share with other people, and it's one of my favorite young person's books. It's just a great little treasure trove of digestible information that's not too overwhelming and doesn't involve a lot of endnotes, so that's good.
Yeah, I've come to, as a teen, I read a lot of semi-grown-up books rather than reading the in-between novels. So I try and make up for it now that I'm a little bit older. And I did the obligatory 20-year rereading of Harry Potter. And again, the Narnia books are fantastic. The latest books that I read were Christopher Paul Curtis's Elijah of Buxton series, and then his other series, which I've just adored, and I love his voice and his tone and his presentations to young people with the very expensive bookmarks, their $20 bills, and everything like that. So I've just really enjoyed those. So I love going back to it. I don't really think there's an age limit to certain books.
And I think I've heard Christopher say on occasion that he really doesn't necessarily write for young people in mind. It's just afterwards there might be an edit that, you know, takes it more in that direction. He more or less writes for everybody, or adults as well. So
okay, we're inviting, we've got this wonderful double act for this episode. Alexander Zelenyj is the author of the books Blacker Against the Deep Dark, Songs for the Lost, Experiments at 3 Billion A.M, and Black Sunshine. He lives in Windsor with his wife and their menagerie of animals. And we also happen to have Elizabeth J.M. Walker, who is the author of the books She Dreamed of Dragons, This Night Sucks, Slip Jig Summer, and The Boy Who Owned the Forest. She also lives in Windsor with her husband and their dog and cat. So now we're getting specific about animals. And full disclosure, it seems that you two live in Windsor in the same house.
Yeah.
Yes.
We do indeed.
Yes, welcome to our married couple guests.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So you two are very much proponents and experts in different kinds of genres. And Alexander, how would you describe your genre? Is it fantasy, or do you subcategorize?
I think broadly speaking, I would call it speculative fiction, which sort of is, I guess, as an umbrella term, it sort of covers fantasy, science fiction, could be anything, horror, noir, something more surreal stuff, magical realism. So because I read all that stuff, it tends to sort of inform what I write as well. So.
And Elizabeth, with your target audience, what is tell us a little bit about your fiction.
Well, I mostly write for children and teenagers, and then it's mostly fantasy, paranormal, like fairy tales and things like that, in that line of genre, I guess.
Alexander, do you start with characters, a situation, or world building? Like, how are your narratives formed?
I suppose it's different all the time. I don't actively ever really think about that when I sit down to write. I think for me, the most important thing is usually atmosphere. So there's always something I want to convey in terms of atmosphere at any given time. So when I sit down, and as long as I can get in that mode, anything that's important to me to talk about within that sort of just naturally comes out. So that's all those things that I want to talk about that are important to me are sort of just in the back of my head, I think. They're just constantly there. But yeah, I enjoy writing the most when I'm sort of creating an atmosphere and a mood that I want to sort of jump into, if that makes sense, sort of immerse myself in.
Are you talking about sort of a physical atmosphere or more of a psychological atmosphere, sort of a tone?
It could be both. It could be, yeah, exactly. It could be, in terms of setting, it could be a geographical area. It could be, yeah, just a tone, a mood, like a pervasive mood of, anything. Could be anything at all. Yeah, atmospheric in terms of, could be the weather, it could be geography, it could be mood, like psychology, yeah.
Elizabeth, with your latest book, The Boy Who Owned the Forest, you use a short story format instead of a full novel for your characters, as most young readers, authors do. Why did you choose that particular format?
They actually, most of them are maybe like 16 or more years old now. They're originally from when I was a teenager, and in my early 20s I used to write a zine of little stories, and that's where pretty much all of these come from. And I later on went through them all, collected which ones I still liked, I guess, and edited them and put them together in this collection. So it was a long time in the making.
Yeah. As many good books are. Yes.
So is this your first book that's short stories? Or?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
all right, yeah. And your stories also work around a theme too, such as grief and facing fears. Why did you choose to purpose them in this way?
It's weird that a lot of reviewers are saying that, because I didn't really purposely write about those things. I feel like those are just the stories I wrote, and then that's how people are interpreting them.
Interesting.
Alexander, what's your favorite format to write in, short stories or novels?
I suppose short stories, because most of my books are collections of short stories. I have several novels in progress going on right now. But I just like the, it's easier. I grow easily bored when I'm working on a longer manuscript and I need to step away. So I invariably go back to working on short fiction, because you can sort of pick away at different things. In my mind, I always liken it to like compiling like a mixtape from when I was a teenager. We used to do that, right? Mixtapes for our friends and stuff like that. And that's kind of how I see it. It's sort of, going back to see which stories sort of work well together. When one ends, how can another story pick up and sort of flow nicely? So once I have like a huge amount of stories, I kind of go through them all and kind of, see what works together in that way. So,
How do you guys write together, or do you sometimes help each other out with stories, or do we?
Well, we always edit each other's stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and do lots of notes, and then just the regular grammar stuff,
Yeah.
typos.
Yeah, proofreading and could be a more content editing, just to kind of give ideas.
Bounce ideas off each other.
Yeah.
But we don't really write together.
No. We sort of, we have two separate offices, so it's nice. We share a wall, so we can hear each other typing on the other side of the wall. So that's kind of nice. I find
You're not
it
like
comforting.
Victoria and Albert and have, opposite desks or anything like
No.
that.
No, I'm sure we could. I'm sure we could do that.
And then we share the dog, too. She
Yeah.
goes back and forth between us.
Yeah. We leave the office doors open. She kind of,
There's a bed in each office.
Oh, that's important.
So,
right.
Elizabeth, what have you learned from editing Alexander's work? How has that influenced yours, perhaps?
That's a good
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Not much, probably.
We write very different things, I would say.
Yeah, we do. I don't know. What do you trying to think?
Have you picked up anything from Elizabeth?
I'm sure we have. It's something, we just, I don't really think about it. It's just, she's somebody whose opinion I trust and I value greatly. Mm-hmm. Because we've known each other for a while. We talk a lot about our interests, our passions when it comes to writing books. So, she's somebody who I think, will be honest and tell me, this is not working. That's what we do for each other, sort of,
You're good at titles, and I'm not.
Oh, thank
so
you.
You chose the title for She Jigged a Dragon.
Oh, I did. That's right.
You
That's
pointed
right.
it out to me that it was a line from the book, and you said this should be the title. But
Yeah, so it could be anything. Little things, big things. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's just, I like reading. It's nice in a way because when I read Elizabeth's books, it's kind of, because it is so different from my stuff, it's a nice step away from what I tend to too often do. So, I don't know, I find it inspiring to sort of go back and it makes me see my stuff in a new light, I suppose, in a way. So, I don't know, yeah. There's a lot of, young adult stuff. There's a kind of, especially some of the more fairy tale-esque stories that are in this book, The Boy Who Owned the Forest. There's a kind of, it's a neat combination of, innocence, but also some adult themes, like grief and loss. So, it's neat kind of seeing those kind of juxtaposed. So, I don't know. When I go from that, for example, and look at my stuff, I also have elements of that. Obviously, those things kind of pop up in my work, but in a different way. So it's a neat way to sort of, reevaluate your own work.
So going back to your own genre, Alex, do you think that there are gaps in the attention that some fantasy authors should be receiving, or has there been an upturn in mainstreaming various genres?
You mean in terms of an acceptance of?
Yeah.
I think there has been, for sure. There's a lot of more contemporary authors that have they're highly regarded, and obviously the older authors as well. But I think there's still a little bit of bias, or I always talk about how certain genre fiction is ghettoized, the sort of not considered as literary as straight literary fiction. Which is not the case at all. There's so much that goes into any good speculative fiction that is completely literary, from whether something specific like character development, or more importantly, it's just everything's about people. It's about humanity. Any good speculative fiction is, any good book is, I think. The backdrop can be as fantastical as you want, but all that really does, I think, or should do in a good speculative fiction book, is sort of help sort of inform the humanity in the book, what's being talked about in terms of the characters. So, I don't know. I think it adds a huge amount of depth that you don't see in other genres, which isn't to downplay those genres. Obviously, it's just there is that kind of richness to it that I don't see elsewhere, I guess. So, I think it is being recognized a little bit more. Like contemporary authors like Neil Gaiman, for example, Clive Barker. They've taken dark fantasy and horror and put it into the mainstream. A lot of people look at that and they see some of the influences that these authors have incorporated into their work, whether it's, could be mythology, could be anything. And I don't know, I think a lot of more people now are seeing that kind of depth and richness. So that's great.
Is there something in contemporary real life that has really served as inspiration for your writing?
Well, the darker side of some of my fiction is definitely just the world around us. You can open a newspaper, you can, crack open any history book, turn on the news at any given time, and we're just bombarded with horrific things that are going on at all times. So I think it's important to sort of, touch on those things in your fiction from time to time, and sort of, even if you can't work to change it, you can sort of bring people's attention to it. And maybe that will, in some way, down the road, keep it in the light. Sort of, maybe that will lead to some sort of positive change. I think you shouldn't ignore those things. I think. Mm-hmm.
Do you find that writing about those things, there are theories that fiction helps us deal with our fears? Do you find that writing about some of those things helps you confront or deal with?
I think so. Yeah, I think sometimes when in my new book in particular, there's a lot of dark stuff in it, and going through and editing it, it's sometimes it feels a little overwhelming, because it's so, there's a lot of that in it, but at the same time, it's yeah, it's kind of freeing, I guess. At some point, I feel anger because it's like, there's all these things going on that I just feel very strongly about, and I don't like these things. I want these things changed, So I don't know. It feels important to do. So I'm happy to have compiled these stories and in one place. So a lot of people who've read them, reviewers, they sort of take that away from it, which I'm really happy about. That there's a lot of dark aspects to the stories, but there's also some hope in there as well. So that's sort of what I see when I turn on the news. You're bombarded with these horrible things, but there's always something good going on. Beauty amongst all the horror.
Well, it's going back to what we were talking about a little bit with you, Elizabeth. Are you finding that your other writing projects are reflecting some of this as well, or some of your newer stuff?
I don't think so.
No, you don't think so?
I don't know.
I think The Boyhood in the Forest, there's some stuff like that.
Yeah, I can't think of any specifics, though.
No.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because you wrote, like you said, you wrote those stories a long time ago. So it's almost like you were a teenager when you wrote some of them, but that's kind of interesting that you would, there are stories that touch on grief and stuff like that. It's kind of a mature thing to, really look at. I think that's pretty cool. So.
Okay.
Maybe you've been influencing him a little bit more than...
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it like to take something that you wrote as a very young person and revisit it with your contemporary self, with your current eye and your current voice?
It's nice to see that you've actually grown a little bit, and that, I guess that's good. But nice to still see myself in it as well, I would say.
Did you do quite a bit of revising?
Not that much, actually. Mostly just like making it a little bit cleaner, things like that.
Wow.
And what's it like working with an illustrator? Because this is beautifully illustrated. Your illustrator, Nicholas Beckett, is from Australia. So how does that work?
He makes zines too, so we met through the zining world, I guess it is.
Oh, the secret zine connection.
Yeah, and so he illustrated some of my zines previously, including some of the stories, like The Maze and The Boy Who Owned the Forest, the title story. He had already done full illustrations for those. I think he added a few more for the book. So then when the publisher asked, do you have anyone in mind, he was the first person I thought of. I was very grateful that he said yes to do it as well.
Yeah, and I feel I'm just going to show my co-conspirators here, and we can maybe take a picture of this for our social media. But the illustrator, this is also his work. Yes, I think all author photographs should be
That cool.
done by the illustrator as well, because I see some cute little pixie ears coming out.
I was like, no pressure, but do you think this is a good idea if you drew our picture?
No, it's brilliant. And I know from BookFest Windsor, a couple of authors, especially in the graphic novel world, have sent me sort of, almost, I don't want to say cartoon, but a graphic novel treatment of their author photo, and I just love it because it brightens up the website. So I think you're onto a good thing.
I am very jealous of your Peter Jackson elven ears. Elven ears. They're amazing.
Yeah, he always does the little illustration, so it just looked wrong if I just had a photo above his illustration.
It works well. Yeah. So tell us about your new projects. Alexander, you just released a chapbook, and The Boy Who Owned the Forest, Elizabeth, this is your newest one.
Yep, earlier this year.
So you've got this new chapbook out?
Yep. Yeah, chapbook. It's called Animals of the Exodus. It was published by the same publisher that released a collection, Black Red Against the Deep Dark. They're called Ivanvale Press. They're based in the UK. It's a short collection, a mini collection of 4 stories that are thematically linked. It's similar to certain stories in the greater collection. 3 of them are new stories, and one's an older story that was published in a magazine years ago, back in 2008, I believe. So, yeah.
And do you have any other projects that the dog is helping you work on in your office?
Yeah, there's always lots of projects on the go, multiple ones all at once. Nothing that's actually been set up to be published or anything, though. Still in the works.
That's good.
Okay, so we're going to invite Alexander and Elizabeth to do some reading. Just to clarify, Alexander's new chapbook, Animals of the Exodus, not Animals of Exodus. That would be a whole other thing involving stone tablets and some sort of menagerie. Moses coming down with a facial and a hairdo.
Okay, so I'll be reading a collection, sorry, please. I'm not reading the entire collection. We don't have time for that. Okay. So, I'll be reading the title story from my collection. It was published last year, December 31st, 2018. Blacker Against the Deep Dark. Mr. Yashimoto was tired. It had been another seemingly endless day at the office. The investment firm for which he worked specialized in asset management, and his newfound role as assistant manager and team supervisor kept him much busier than he liked. Long workday hours were generally followed by his having to bring aspects of his work home with him, ruining his weeknights and spoiling the former luxury of weekends he'd enjoyed before his promotion. He was grateful for his job and the life it afforded him and his family, and yet he couldn't help but feel gloomy on days like this, early in the week and trudging home with another long slew of days exactly like it before him. "It's not very disciplined of me," he muttered, thinking of his parents, long since passed away, in whose efficient house with its strict regime he'd so often felt ill-fitting, misplaced, his head circling in fantasies of things he might be doing rather than the schoolwork that he was neglecting. And he added, feeling young and emboldened and angry all at the same time, "But I don't care." He set off again, shoulders slumped petulantly, fists clenched and swinging at his sides, his steps moving faster along the sidewalk. Suddenly a voice said, "Be free, son, for you are free." He spun around, looking in all directions for the speaker, but look where he might, he could find no one. The street in both directions lay empty of vehicle and pedestrian traffic. The porches of the houses across the street were unpeopled, shuttered against the sunset. The sheer brick face of the building along which he stood, a long derelict schoolhouse, reared upwards, dark and windowless and mute. At its base, a handful of virgin white lilies stirred in the breeze, looking misplaced in the desolation of sun-bleached, scraggly weeds and ancient brick. At last, as if resigned to do so, as if he'd known all along that he must do this thing, he turned his eyes upon the shadow blasted into the stone wall before him. The shadow's human shape could not be denied, no matter how strongly he sometimes wished he could successfully deny it. Its round-shouldered, bowed posture, head inclined toward the ground, as if it were being buffeted by a very strong wind. A frail arm raised before its head in futile defense. He passed the same place each day, twice, both on his way to and from his job, and always his eyes were drawn to it, though he often only looked quickly before turning away and refocusing his thoughts on the importance of the work-day ahead, or the importance of finishing his work at home, after he had supper with his wife and 10-year-old son. His grandfather had introduced him to the shadow people of Hiroshima when he was a very young boy, but he'd never forgotten that distant day of encounters. Wandering the streets by foot with his slow-moving grandfather, the old man's twisted bamboo cane tapping a sharp, emphatic percussion everywhere they went, as if he were emphasizing each of their steps through a city the young boy had only then learned was inhabited by just as many ghosts as men. The old man would offer occasional narration to the scenes they witnessed, pausing to point a quivering line with the bamboo cane toward a blank building facade or schoolhouse wall or a set of concrete steps rising to the door of a Buddhist temple overlooking the sidewalk, and saying things like, "Thousands died, here and everywhere. The air grew dark and smelled like a charnel house. The sun was put out. And children died on that day too. Babies burned. The bomb, that great fire, did not discriminate. And people suffered so, their skin burned, their eyes melted, and came running from their sockets like spoiled milk. They vomited for days, and then they died. It was hell fallen from the sky on a morning like any other, but like no other. And, look, there and there and there, and see their spirits condemned forever to the face of the stricken city, on a stricken day in history. See them, and hear what they tell us." These words chilled the boy, and because he never forgot them, they grew to chill him more and more as he grew to manhood, for he also grew to understand them more and more. His grandfather had passed on, and so had his parents, but always the old man's words stayed close with him, haunting and awful, and yet not entirely unwelcome, much like the city's shadow people themselves. Finally, Mr. Yashimoto turned back to the brick wall. "I am ashamed," he said to the shadow form in the wall. "I forgot my good fortune. Thank you for reminding me of the world." All was still and quiet. No more voices spoke on the air. Mr. Yashimoto remained standing on the sidewalk beside the wall as dusk stole over the city, no longer feeling the same urgency to hurry home as he had. He waited and waited and waited. He heard the distant gonging of bells from the Shinto temple several blocks to the east. He smelled the miracle of the white flowers' perfume on the still air. He thought of his son, who would soon be old enough to be taken on a tour of the city and shown its long history and saga of shadows in every building, every temple, every home new and old, every tree standing tall in the face of the wind. He'd hoped the descending darkness would blanket the wall before him, concealing its shadow body, but even in the night the form stood out starkly, blacker against the deep dark. There was a lesson in this too, thought Haruki Yashimoto, and with it clutched to his heart, he bowed respectfully to the wall before turning and walking unhurriedly down the sidewalk in the direction of his home and family waiting.
So I'm going to be reading the story The Tree from The Boy Who Owned the Forest. Okay. Part 1. Josh remembered the tree as a little sapling in his parents' backyard. It slowly grew toward the sky. By the time Josh was 7, he could climb among its branches. He even fell once and broke his arm. Then, when he was 12, he woke up one day and looked out in his backyard, and the tree was gone. Part 2. Rodney was a fisherman's son off the coast of Newfoundland. He was on his father's boat when he saw the tree, roots and all, floating in the ocean. He told his mom about the tree over dinner that night. She thought it sounded like an odd thing to see, and passed the peas. Part 3. Maddie's kite blew into the tree. The tree shook its branches and let the kite glide back to her waiting, outstretched hands. Then it left the park to continue on its way. "Thank you," Maddie had called after it. Part 4. All Pierre remembered was waking up to see a full-sized tree in the center of his front lawn one morning, where no tree had been before. He rushed off to the bus stop so he wouldn't be late for school again. When he got home later that day, the tree was gone. Part 5. A squirrel once tried to make a nest in the tree. She didn't like the constant change of scenery and decided to raise her young elsewhere. Part 6. Sophia was in the forest with her black lab, Marty, taking an autumn stroll. She saw the tree move among the tall oaks. Marty barked and tried to chase it, but Sophia called him back. When she got home, she told herself she must have just been seeing things. Part 7. Neil followed the tree. He was wandering late at night, as he often did, much to his mother's worry. Fluffy snowflakes gently began to fall, occasionally illuminated by the streetlights. Neil saw the tree stroll down an alley, and he knew he had to follow. He slowed down as he got closer, staying a bit behind the tree. The city was quiet, fast asleep. Not a single car in the street. Buses had stopped running hours ago. It was the time of night that Neil loved best. The tree, roots crunching in a thick layer of snow that had already covered the ground, made its way down the road. Its winter branches were bare of leaves, but now heavy in white snowflakes. Neil followed closer as they entered the streets of suburbia full of large Victorian houses with their pointed turrets, decorative trim, and grand porches. The tree moved steadily and swiftly, with purpose. Neil was practically jogging to keep up with the tree, and then bam, his sneakered foot slid on a sheet of dark ice, and he went crashing to the ground. "Ouch," Neil mumbled as he lay on the ice. Neil sat up, feeling pain throb through his tailbone. He heard the snow crunching and looked up to see the tree looming above him. The tree lowered a branch down to Neil. Neil, amazed, took hold, and the tree helped him to his feet. The tree didn't have eyes, but Neil felt its gaze upon him. Why? Neil asked. Sometimes, the tree said softly, though where its voice came from he did not know. It's good to do something no one ever believed you could do. Huh, Neil said, and the tree continued on its way. The end.
Thank you for being with us, Alexander Zelenyj and Elizabeth J.M. Walker. What a fascinating conversation it's been.
Oh, thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.